Grocery stores have seen a surge of shoppers, and that's causing a fast change on how they operate. Fox Business Network's Grady Trimble has more from Chicago.
It's hard to find companies that are hiring right now, but just about every regional and national grocery store chain is. From Whole Foods, where we are, to Kroger, to the largest grocery store chain in the country, Walmart, there are tens of thousands of job openings right now. They simply can't hire people fast enough. Shoppers, of course, have changed their habits as well. Instacart hiring 300,000 workers right now to fulfill deliveries because many people are skipping going into the stores. But for the people who are going into stores, they've changed their habits too.
We are disinfecting everything. We are shopping with our eyes when before we select something to minimize the amount of touching. We have to do it and be good-spirited and appreciative of the heroes that we have in these stores who are providing our groceries for us. The heroes.
Even though grocery stores are hiring right now to keep up with the demand, some experts are warning that they could see a sales slump in the future because people have hoarded items and they won't need as much in the coming weeks. In Chicago, Grady Trimble, Fox Business.